Hey guys, Lou here and welcome back to Acorn Hill. Just touching base with you guys again. It's been a while since I've been in front of the camera. I hope you're liking all the content that we are putting out so far. We have a few more and a lot more coming up now that the growing season 2021 is underway. There will be lots of projects and plantings and things that we can all learn something good and something new from. Today I wanted to show you, this is a long overdue video of how DIY on our lily pads. As most of you know, we have this DIY homemade lily pad installation that we were inspired by when we visited Moss Mountain Farm in Arkansas, and we were invited to a lunch by P.Allen Smith. By his bar in his big house, there on the wall is this installation of lily pads that were arranged and installed on the wall, and Kat and I thought that that would be a very interesting two-dimensional to three-dimensional installation that we can put here in Acorn Hill. Well, I had an idea on how to make them, and 4 years ago I started making 12 or 13 individual pieces that now I wanted to share with you on how I make. The trick here is getting the craft clay that you could use for when you wanted to do a small scale model for sculpting. A basic way when I made our lily pad installation 4 years ago. So if you happen to stumble upon the videos in our channel, welcome to Acorn Hill. It's a channel that talks about all our interests, all the projects that we get into, DIY, gardening, homekeeping, homesteading, and the like. I hope you would consider subscribing to the channel. We are now growing, and I thank each and every one of you who've shown interest and who've been commenting and putting down their thoughts, creating a conversation within the content and material that we put on the channel. I don't want to keep you too long. This is the video for our homemade DIY lily pad wall art here on Acorn Hill.
Before we start making the lily pad, I wanted to share with you the different basic home items to help you make your own lily pads. One of those items, you need to have a plate with patterning on it. Lily pads or lily leaves have their own patterning, and the veining needs to be pronounced and it needs to be distinct when you put your material right on top of it so you can get an imprint. This is an antique glass serving dish that would be good for this project. Next, you need material that you can actually use to mold and shape and form the leaf or the lily pad itself. A couple of years back, I discovered this air dry clay. You can get this from the craft store and it's fairly inexpensive. I used it in a couple of projects in the past. The product claims that it air dries. It dries when you leave it out in the open, whatever type of project you have using this material. Now for the lily pads, what I do is I left it on the mold on that plate that I showed you earlier, and I stuck it in the oven for a few hours at low temperature. Now I know that on the packaging, and I'm showing it to you now, that it says no baking and that it dries hard. That's just an added insurance for me. That's why I like placing my final product in the oven so that it mimics the kilning process, similar to the step that they do in pottery. Here are the things we need: the air clay, a rolling pin, and your pattern plate. Again, any plate, any size, as long as there's deep veining in it, it will really work well. Okay, moving on to the fun part. What I do is I grab me a handful of the air clay coming from the packaging itself. To prevent the rest of the air clay from drying out, I put it in a Ziploc bag. This is similar to making bread, so once you get your piece, begin kneading the clay in your hands. Allow it to soften up and allow it to blend a little bit. Air clay, when taken fresh out of the packaging, sometimes is hard, and this kneading process allows it to soften and become more malleable. Now also at this stage, with your hands, you can slowly form it into a ball, similar to dough. So at this stage, we've mashed the dough, we've kneaded the dough, we've formed it into a ball, and now the next stage is almost similar to making a pizza dough. You use the rolling pin and slowly flatten the dough into a disc. You take your time here. There's really no set rule. All you have to do is gently turn the dough, lift it off the work surface. I find that turning the dough and lifting it every quarter turn helps to ease out the mound of dough that's on the center of the disc. It also allows for a little bit more flexibility, allowing for the size of the initial dough that you took out of the package. the pressure that you put on the rolling pin to give you the final decision on what shape this dough will take. Okay, I'm just doing some final passes and final check on this disc. Notice that the shape of the disc is irregular, which is mimicking the size and the shape and the overall appearance of the outline of a lily pad. Once satisfied with the shape of the disc, I set it aside and then I take out the plate. Now the plate has two sides, one side that has all the pattern on it and the other side that's smooth. What I'm doing here is I'm roughly shaping, looking to see where I will place the dough on top of the rough side of the plate. I continue to eyeball for placement, and finally I lay down the dough right on top of the rough side of the plate. In order to take the shape, the texture, the veining, and the different nooks and crannies of this plate, I lay it on it and gently press. Pressing from light to medium, making sure that every side of that clay take all the different veining and patterning that is rendered by the plate. Notice that at this point, we're also taking the shape, the concave shape of the plate, and also the undulating shape rendered by the undulations of this plate. All those curvy sides of the plate will allow for this lily pad to become a little bit more three-dimensional. Because this plate that I'm using for pattern has the texture and all the veining on its concave side, what's happening here is we will end up having the texture imprint on the convex side of the clay. And because with our knowledge of biology, we know that lily pads do not grow convex floating on water, what I did was I took out the disc from the inside part of the plate, inverted the plate so that I can see the smooth side of it, flipped the disc of clay, and place it right on top of the smooth side of the plate. Let me show that to you again. I took out the disc of clay from the inside, concave side, the patterned side of the plate. I then flipped the plate so that I can have the smooth side facing up. I then flipped the clay disc so that I could have all the imprinted side laying against and right on top of the smooth side of the plate. Because the clay disc is still smooth, gravity now pulls the clay dough right on top, molding onto the undulating surfaces of the plate. I also lightly pressed on it, that way we can get some of the impressions and the curvy side forming the curled side of the plate leaves as it slowly dries out. After this is done, at this point, it is ready to kiln. It is ready to bake in a 200-degree oven for 4 hours. Low and slow is how I like doing this. I also, for some reason, used a different plate. I took the disc out and now you can see the impressions right on top of that clay disc. I placed this on another concave ceramic plate, which is what I will use as the carrier when I place this dough inside the oven. Low and slow, the temperature in the oven will evaporate all the extra moisture that's already still embedded in this clay dough. A final set of tweaks just to make sure that I get all the ruffles right and all the curvatures right. And it's off to the oven, 200 degrees for 4 hours. And 4 hours later, it's dry, it didn't change color, and I left it on the counter to cool down. While that's cooling down, time to mix up the paint. Now, lily pads have different shades of green, and for this type of application, what I did was took out my already existing acrylic paints, mix them up freehand, and see what tint of green I can come up with. As you can see from this clip, there are 4 shades of green that I had to use, 4 different bottles of acrylic. I mixed it up and I ended up having a more bright, vibrant turquoisey green. It took about 20 minutes for the clay to cool down. The vibrant green that I have is what I'm using an old brush. This is what I will put as the first layer. Lily pads, like I said, have different hues of green, and layering them on would be the best thing for this to have a more three-dimensional look. After putting the first layer of paint on the correct side of the lily pad, it is now time for me to cover the edges of this ceramic plate and also the back. Okay, after the first layer, it is now time to put the second layer. Now you can see the second layer and the second color of paint is different in shade. The idea here is to just lightly glide the brush on top of the right side of the plate. And much the same as how I painted on the first layer of paint, I also made sure that the edges and some parts of the back of this plate is covered by the second layer, the second color of green. Painting on the border of the back of this plate is what's called feathering. I start from the edge and then lightly pull the brush toward the center of the plate, allowing the brush to also come off of the surface, which creates that feathering effect. Okay, moving right along. As you can see, with two paints already painted on and applied on top of the ceramic, it is absorbed by the porous nature of the clay. There's now a light dimension that we are putting on the correct side of the plate, but in order to give it more depth, what I'm doing here is I'm applying a lighter shade of green, and I'm now brushing the ridges of those convolutions, those undulations, those folds that you see on top of the plate. This will give it that lightness so that when the light hits it, hopefully it will mimic and emulate what would be a lily pad that we see floating on top of water. Also emphasizing some form of veining on top of the plate and on top of the leaf. What I do is I pull the brush on a sideways direction from the center, and I follow exactly at the point of the ridge and gently glide it, paint it right on top and over the sides of the actual fold and ridge of the clay. Okay, and here we are. We can clearly see that the dimension of the plate is now different. We can see some of the formations of the veining, the depth that is being created because we painted right on top and along the side of the ridges. And so the next thing is to add yet again another layer, and this time I'm going to be using a darker color green. Dimension and depth, that's what this painting is all about. Different lighter, darker shades of the same color, painting it and emphasizing all the different ridges and even the pattern that we placed the raw clay right on top of. Remember that plate, the glass plate that we used earlier? Using this darker green will now emphasize and will showcase some of those ridges and nooks and crannies that we imprinted from the glass plate from the beginning of this video. Okay guys, different day, different video, same material, same topic. As you can see from this clip, I have two different plates. The first one, the one on the right, was the bigger one fell off and broke itself that I fixed. And the second plate from the previous segment of this same video. Let me explain what I'm doing here. When the first type of acrylic paint dried, it did not look glossy. It did not give it that shine and sheen that we like. And all the work that we did, albeit good and albeit successful, just did not highlight the actual plate because it was a matte finish. So what I did here was I spray painted it green. It's a brighter green this time, but it will give us the same look, but this time in a reflective glossy finish. I think that for what it's worth, the procedure that I showed earlier is still worth keeping in this video because it tells and shows everyone who's interested in making this project how to do it step by step. The only unforced error that I did during the first segment of the video is that I did not get to use glossy finish on the paint. But just the same, it's the process that should work, which I hope would be helpful for any of you out there who'd be interested in making this project. And as you can see from the clip, what I'm doing here is I'm just dragging the brush with a lighter green color of paint right over the same plate, right over this time on that brighter Krylon Farm green that I painted on top of the ceramic plate. And to finish the first video of what I had to fix, this bigger plate that I had to glue in place, you can see the glue, the seaming of the glue and the crack parts, which are now pretty much covered by the green Krylon paint that I used. I'm just putting in some final touches on this, dragging the paint again and the paintbrush from the inside of the plate and feathering it out toward the side. Well, I hope you liked this video. I know that we had two different processes on how to form, how to bake, how to make this DIY lily pad to form into an installation. Went through several steps here and several types of production, but I think that it's a fun project. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. For those of you who happened to the video, click the like button, and if you don't mind sharing it with your friends, it'd be great to have you also on board as part of the Acorn Hill gang. If you don't mind subscribing, that'd be great, allowing me to produce more video and content. Speaking of, there's a lot more coming up, and I hope that this year we'll get more and more subscriptions and more people tuning in. For now, this is Louie. Thanks again for checking out my channel, and we'll see you back here in Acorn Hill. Bye-bye for now.